Вітаємо всіх, хто буде переглядати цю програму. Наша розмова сьогоднішня якраз буде про соборноправність нашої церкви і в основному аспект соборноправності, що якраз стосується вибору нового митрополита в нашій церкві. Як ви знаєте, наш митрополит через стан здоров'я йде на пенсію, і новий митрополит буде, через певний час буде обраний. Якраз моєю дуже великою приємністю є вітати отця Богдана сьогодні, тому що фактично на ті bylaws, що ми прийняли, чи статут, що ми прийняли у 2008 році, отець Богдан дуже багато часу і енергії поклав і працював над якраз розробленням цього статуту. Так само просимо сьогодні всіх вас після молитви. Якщо потрібно щось в англійській мові це робити, будемо більшість в англійській. А якщо якісь будуть питання українською мовою, так само будемо робити це українською мовою. So once again, welcome Father Bogdan. Glory be to Jesus Christ to all our viewers. I have a great pleasure to have Father Bogdan speaking today on the process of election of a new Metropolitan in our church. It's a very timely topic because our Metropolitan Yuri, due to his health, is going for his відпуск, not відпуск, sorry, is going for his
retirement.
And we will be faced with that necessity in a couple of months. So Father Bogdan had worked on the bylaws of 2008 that had been adopted in 2008, and I would consider him as an expert on how that process works. And after our prayers, I'll just ask him to actually share with us that knowledge. Отже, почнемо нашу зустріч з молитвою. В ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. В ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. В ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. O Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, everywhere present and filling all things, treasury of blessing and giver of life, come and dwell in us, and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls a good one. Glory to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, both now and ever, and to ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Father, bless.
Lord Jesus Christ, our God, through the prayers of your most holy mother and of all the saints, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.
Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Отже, Богдане, I'll ask you to start that conversation and introduce the topic of our bylaws and, of course, how the process works.
Добре, дякую. Some of you may notice I'm not at home in Oshawa today. We're closed on a new condominium we're buying here in Hamilton. So I'm in Hamilton, our old condo, and it's been a really, really busy runaround day. So I just got here a little while ago, and I'm happy to be here. But the good news is that I wrote this presentation out in advance, so I won't be wandering all over the place. I will read it to you because it is very neatly structured, and it's important not to have any misunderstandings or misapprehensions about all of this. It's based upon the governing documents of our church, and it's really important for everybody who's going to be taking part in the Sobor to be familiar with them. So what I'm going to do is tomorrow when I get back to Oshawa, I'm going to post this on our parish website. If you go tomorrow afternoon, probably by 2 o'clock, it should be there under the rubric Pastoral Musings. A PDF of this will be here, and it has all of the citations for the documents that are being cited and everything else. And again, I would just underline the fact that the more informed all of our faithful and clergy are when they go to the Sobor, the better chance we have of making a correct, God-pleasing decision, no matter what we're deciding. So I will begin. I'm going to read. It'll probably be about 30 to 35 minutes. And then after that, if anybody has any particular questions, we can deal with them.
Lord, let me just interrupt you for a second. If anybody would like the copy of that document, Father Bogdan kindly shared it with me. Please email me and I'll be more than happy to share it with you as well, directly.
Okay, here we go. The election of a metropolitan in the UOCC, principles and procedures. Introduction. In order to discuss how a metropolitan or bishop is elected in the UOCC, we first need to identify what the role of a bishop or metropolitan is in the Orthodox Church, the historical development of this office, and the biblical, canonical, and practical qualifications for this office. In addition, we also need to understand the unique aspects of the polity of the UOCC, specifically the concept of sobornopravnost, as commonly understood in the UOCC. After this, it will be possible to review the governing documents of the UOCC, which relate to the election of hierarchs, and consider all of this information in terms of its utility, practicality, and meaning. Section 1, the bishop. Bishop, in Greek, episkopos, means overseer. In the early church, the bishop was the president, that is, he presided at the Eucharist, of the local Christian community, what we would now call the parish. Besides presiding at the Eucharist, he would maintain contact with the bishops of the surrounding communities, would teach, enforce Christian discipline, prepare catechumens for baptism, etc. The biblical qualifications for the episcopate could be found in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. This is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not covetous. One who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have a good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. And you can also check the epistle of Titus, chapter 1, verse 1, and the first epistle of St. Peter, chapter 5, verses 1 to 4. They're all very similar in what they say. During the post-apostolic period, the role of the bishop was more as the father of a local community, but the bishop of particular cities felt it proper and reasonable to offer counsel and advice to the clergy and faithful of other communities. If you read, for example, the letters of St. Ignatius of Antioch or St. Clement of Rome, we see this. In the course of time, especially after the legalization of Christianity in the 4th century, when diocesan boundaries were made contiguous with civil administrative boundaries, the bishops of larger cities, metropolises, were accorded a primacy of honor and even authority. These metropolitans went from being local pastor to the overseer of a larger territory, a pastor of pastors, so to speak, and a liaison between the Christian community and the civil authorities. This polity became canonically normative within our orthodoxy. Though according to the canons, each bishop is completely autonomous in his own diocese, canonically, all the bishops of a particular territory must recognize the first among them, whether he's titled the archbishop, the metropolitan, or the patriarch, who is enjoined to work cooperatively with all the other bishops of his territory. These other bishops should do nothing without the metropolitan's approval, and he should do nothing without their agreement either. This is the conciliar or collegial ideal of Orthodox ecclesiology. Bishops were originally elected by the faithful of the diocese. For example, the Archbishop of Cyprus is still elected by the populace in a popular vote. This practice was traditional in certain places like the Balkans even until the 19th century and was approved as normative at the Moscow Council of 1917-1918. But it is also important to note that the consecrating bishops always had the final word. The metropolitan and neighboring bishops could simply decide that the candidate was not worthy of consecration. In the first millennium, this would usually be because of the candidate's association with some type of heresy. The point is that everyone in the church or the diocese had a voice in choosing their bishop. As time went on and the church became more institutionalized and bureaucratic, certain changes crept in. While originally a married man could become a bishop, in the 6th century it was decided that the bishop should be a monastic. Behind the practical reasons for this which were issues of family inheritance, mixing of church and personal property, etc., is the concept that the bishop is married to his diocese. Regarding the intimate existential relationship between a bishop and his diocese, Metropolitan John Zizioulas of Pergamon, probably one of the most influential and well-known Orthodox theologians today, writes, just as the church becomes through the ministry a relational entity both in itself and in its relationship to the world, so also the ordained man becomes through his ordination a relational entity. In this context, looking at the ordained person as an individual defeats the very end of ordination. For ordination aims precisely at making man not an individual, but a person, that is, an ecstatic being that can be looked upon not from the angle of his limits, but of his overcoming his selfhood and becoming a related being. In the light of the koinonia, or communion of the Holy Spirit, ordination relates the ordained man so profoundly and so existentially to the community that in his new state after ordination, he cannot be any longer as a minister conceived in himself. Only in terms of love can one understand the mystery of charismatic life and therefore of ministry. And these words are from the book Being as Communion. It's an Orthodox classic, and they apply, of course, to every member of the ordained clergy. To those interested in this topic about, the place and role of the bishop, I would highly recommend reading the article, The Bishop, His Status and Authority by Metropolitan Hladio Ohienko. It is a thorough and well-written study on the role and responsibilities of an Orthodox bishop. It's on the website of the UOCC, and I have the citation with the link on the PDF of the paper. So if either from Father Ehud, if you wait till tomorrow for our website, you can follow that link. And really, it's a longer article, but it's excellent, and everybody should read it. Section 2, Sobornopravnost. Sobornopravnost is a word bandied about and used almost in an incantational sense by many people within the UOCC. What makes this very odd and confusing is that the word is only used once and never defined in any of the governing documents of the church, not in the charter, the bylaws, the articles of agreement. So what is sobornopravnost? And it's often translated as conciliarity, but honestly, two other books everybody who's interested should read: the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada by Senator Paul Yuzik, and the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada by Odarka Trotsky. Senator Yuzik's book is from 1951. Dr. Trotsky's book is from 1968. They are fundamental if we want to understand the history of the church. And I really like what Dr. Trotsky wrote about sobornopravnost. She translates it as soborocracy, like we have autocracy or bureaucracy, ruled by bureaucratism. She calls it soborocracy, ruled by sobor. And that is, I believe, a much more faithful translation of the word sobornopravnost. To set the edges of the various construals of sobornopravnost, that is to look at the ends of, where that concept fits in, we can start with the article, Conciliarity is not ruled by laity. Sobornopravnost nie je mirjanopravstvo by Metropolitan Hladio Ohienko, who wrote, the Ukrainian church in the course of time produced conciliarity, sobornopravnost. This means that the church is governed through councils, sobors, eparchial and national. What the sobors decide, the bishops implement. This conciliarity, sobornopravnost, has become a characteristic of church life. It has entered into our church tradition. This type of conciliarity is mandated by the holy canons. They direct that a council, a sobor, should be called once or twice per year. The canons do not make mention regarding the participation of laity in church councils. In ancient times, they did not take part, or else they were very few and their presence was not mandatory. But the Ukrainian church tradition determined that there were often a small number of the better representatives of the people. Conciliarity, sobornopravnost, has been known in our church for a long time, but this should not become Caesaropopulism. He uses the Ukrainian word narodocesarism. Secular people or the laity have their own limited activity in the outward life of the church, but not in any case the direction of the church. And the work of the Lord must be done conscientiously only with pure hands, for damned is everyone who does the work of the Lord carelessly. Jeremiah chapter 48, verse 10. All authority in the church, in accordance with the holy canons and apostolic regulations, is entrusted only to the bishops. That's the end of the quote, and that's from the article Sobornopravnost cenne mirianopravstvo. It is in the book Ideologia Ukrainskої Православної Церкви, published in Winnipeg. So as can be seen from that quote, this is an extremely episcopocentric understanding of church polity. At the other end of the spectrum is the idea that the church is in its essence simply one more democratic institution, no different than the Parliament of Canada or the local school board. So those are sort of the bounds of where you can situate that concept of sobornopravnost. To get to the heart of the matter, it's important to understand the difference between and among sobornopravnost, sobornost, synodalnost, autocracy, monarchy, and democracy. So a simple definition of sobornopravnost might be combined clerical lay governance with the church sobor as the highest organ of power or authority. All of this is always with the understanding that canonical matters can only be decided by the episcopate. That's one of their primary functions. But other than canonical matters and matters of clerical discipline, etc., we can say it might be described as combined clerical lay governance with the church sobor as the highest organ of power or authority. Then we have the concept of sobornost, and this is usually translated either as conciliarity or collegiality. This is a theological term. It is one of the marks of the church listed in the Niceo-Constantinopolitan Creed. Вірую в єдину святу соборну і апостольську церкву. In one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The Greek word is katoliki. And it indicates the fact that the church is universal in scope and that every baptized person by virtue of their baptism is a full member of the church and therefore should take full responsibility for the church, whether they are ordained or not. Next, we have synodalnost. This indicates that the bishops of a local church or metropolitanate are to gather together in synod to discuss and decide matters which relate to the life of their church. All Orthodox churches are synodal in this manner. It also refers to the fact that we follow the teachings of the ecumenical and local councils, which in Greek are called, you guessed it, synods. So the Orthodox Church is, of course, synodal, understood in those two particular ways. Then we have the term autocracy, which means rule by one person. This could be an emperor, could be a king, right? The idea of monarchy, this indicates that one person is the head of a country, of a church. And then the term democracy, which means rule by the people, which in its most basic form would simply mean rule by the majority. The important thing to note is that all of the above terms are involved in some way with the decision-making process. The first three are traditionally consensus-based. The foundational example for this would be the Apostolic Council related in chapter 15 of the Book of Acts. And the last three are power-based. One person in the case of autocracy or monarchy, or a majority of people in a simple democracy. The polity of the church, if it is authentic, is neither autocratic, nor monarchical, nor democratic. It is conciliar, collegial, and in regard to bishops, synodal. And that's an important point to make because it's a general point for the entire Orthodox Church anywhere in the world. The polity of the Church, if it is authentic, is neither autocratic, nor monarchical, nor democratic. It is conciliar, collegial, and in regard to bishops, synodal. In regard to the polity of the UOCC in particular, it can be said that in one sense, the Metropolitan of the UOCC is even more autonomous in his power than the Patriarch of Constantinople, for decisions of the Patriarchate can only be made by the full Patriarchal Synod. In the UOCC, in the absence of a duly constituted Council of Bishops, the Metropolitan has complete unilateral decision-making power on behalf of the entire episcopate and in his role as president of the consistory, consequently over the entire church. And please believe me, I'm not insinuating anything by that statement, nor am I accusing anyone of anything. I'm simply pointing out that such a thing is possible given the system of governance enshrined in our governing documents. And so again, that's why please go and read the governing documents. Third point, election. Now we come to the matter at hand. Regarding the actual election of a metropolitan, the easiest way to present the process is by answering the questions that my parishioners and parishioners from other parishes have asked me. Who can we elect? How does he get elected? When does he have to be elected? So who does the electing, right? And so I'm just going to deal with those questions in order. So who can be elected metropolitan? To be elected metropolitan, a man must first be a bishop. In addition to the biblical and canonical qualifications for the episcopate, the bylaws of the UOCC state the following. This is paragraph 6, subchapter 03. I'm sorry, paragraph 6.03, regarding minimum qualifications for candidature to the rank of bishop. Must be a male person who is a celibate or widower. Must be eligible for membership in the priesthood. Must have attained the age of 35 years. Must have pronounced the second monastic vows, that is taken the small schema. All of those, by the way, are canonical requirements. Next, the completion of required academic and theological studies, steadfastness of faith, piety, and moral values, and demonstrated leadership qualities in pastoral or monastic service. That's what's in that paragraph in our church statute. The responsibilities of the Metropolitan are listed in Chapter 5, paragraphs 6 to 11 of the bylaws, and state that, among others, the Metropolitan, by virtue of his office and as teacher and defender of the faith, shall have the following authority and duties in addition to those herein before provided or accorded by the canonical tradition of the Holy Church. And then it lists, and this is not a comprehensive list, just a few things, that he is to visit all missions and parishes of the church on a regular basis and to attend eparchial retreats, conferences, and assemblies, to present to the General Council through the Consistory Board the names of suitable candidates for election to the office of bishop, with the names of the candidates so elected to be submitted to the Patriarchal Synod for canonical election and ratification for the purposes of consecration, to carry out the duties of an eparchial bishop in such eparchy where there is no eparchial bishop for whatever reason, and to act in the place and stead of the Council of Bishops in the event the same shall not exist. In addition, in the policies and procedures of the UOCC, Policy 23 speaks about language fluency. It says, the demographics and current composition of the community of faithful served by the UOCC reflects a broad spectrum of Ukrainian and English language utilization within the Church. Based on this reality, the UOCC reaffirms the continued relevance of bilingualism as a fundamental character of the Church and calls on its hierarchs and clergy to develop and maintain a working ability to communicate and serve in both Ukrainian and English languages. It is also understood that for those clergy serving parishes in those regions where French is an official or working language, it would be desirable that they have the capacity to provide service in French when possible. And that's from the policies and procedures. Again, all these documents are available on the UOCC website. From the above, it can easily be understood that a candidate for the position of Metropolitan in the UOCC should, in addition to the other biblical and canonical requirements, be fluent in both spoken and written English and Ukrainian, and of course a working knowledge of French would be beneficial if the bishop or priest is in Quebec. that he should have the physical stamina to be able to maintain a fairly rigorous travel schedule, that he should have good organizational skills, that he should be concerned with succession planning, that he should have good leadership skills and have demonstrated success in his previous obediences, whether as a parish priest, a monastery abbot, an eparchial bishop, etc. Next question, who does the electing? Here, there is a measure of murkiness. Paragraph 9 of the charter of the UOCC states that the corporation, that is the UOCC, may from time to time at its general council make bylaws not contrary to law for A, B, and then C, the appointment or deposition of the consistory, bishops, administrators, special committees of boards from time to time for the purposes of the corporation. The UOCC bylaws state that, this is paragraph 401, subject to the act, the General Council is vested with the supreme power in all temporal matters of the Church and constitutes its highest legislative and administrative authority. 402 says, without limiting the generality of the foregoing, the authority of the General Council shall include the following. Subparagraph H says, appointment of bishops and election of candidates to the episcopacy subject to canonical ratification by the Patriarchal Synod. And then K, setting the standards and terms of service, including retirement of all clergy. And further, paragraph 5, subpoint 02, the candidate or candidates for the office of Metropolitan shall be elected by the General Council and shall be presented to the Patriarchal Synod for approval. The individual so elected to the office of Metropolitan shall serve as such until A, he dies, or B, he resigns or retires, or C, he is deposed by due canonical process, or D, he is medically certified to be incapacitated. While it is very clear that from the standpoint of the Charter and the bylaws that the Metropolitan is elected at a duly constituted subord of the UOCC, paragraph 6 of the Articles of Agreement with the Patriarch of Constantinople states that, quote, the primate or acting primate of the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada, after consultation with the Exarch of the Americas, shall submit a slate of candidates for the office of the Metropolitan and bishops to the General Council, the Sobor, of the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada for approval in the first instance. The names of those candidates so approved shall then be submitted to the Holy and Sacred Synod of the Ecumenical Patriarchate for approval for consecration. While Chapter 5, Paragraph 12 of the UOCC Church Bylaws states that, quote, in the event of a vacancy in the office of the Metropolitan, names of candidates for that office shall be presented to the consistory board by the Council of Bishops for election at a general council to be convened not later than 1 year after such vacancy occurs, and the name of the candidate so elected shall thereafter immediately be submitted to the Patriarchal Synod for canonical ratification for the purpose of consecration or elevation. In order to bring a little bit of clarity as to why some of that is written that way, we have to note that in accordance with apostolic practice, and we read this in Acts, the book of Acts chapter 1, verse 26, it is common within the Orthodox Church to cast lots to determine the choice of a bishop. We witnessed this last week, those who followed the election of the Patriarch of Serbia. The bishops themselves elected 3 candidates, and then the name of each was put in an envelope. Those envelopes were put in various places within the gospel book, and then a monk came and he chose one of them at random, and we have Patriarch Porfiria of Serbia. In 1917, that was the method used to choose the new Patriarch of Moscow, because you remember that the Patriarchate was abolished at the beginning of the 18th century, and it was only in 1917 that it was reestablished. And when they elected, again, the Sobor, not just the bishops, the Sobor in Moscow elected 3 candidates to be Patriarch. Their names were put into a chalice, and one name was chosen from the chalice. That, of course, was Patriarch Tikhon. There's a similar practice within the Coptic Orthodox Church in Greece, where they do the same thing. They put the names in a chalice, and then a little child, they choose a little child who comes and pulls out the name of who's going to be the bishop. So For those of you who are old like me and can remember back to 2005, after Metropolitan John was elected at the Sobor in Winnipeg, his name, of course, went to Constantinople. But we had some rumblings because when the announcement came from Constantinople that he had been elected, well, they followed his practice there. So in the press release, it stated that Metropolitan was elected from among 3 candidates. And everybody sort of said, well, we only elected 1 candidate, right? So it's just important to keep that in mind because that's a practice in most other Orthodox churches. And so to come back to the question, who elects the Metropolitan? Candidates are first chosen by the Council of Bishops or the Metropolitan in the absence of such council, and then they are presented to the consistory, who presents him or them to a general council, a Sobor of the church. If a man or men are elected, then that name or names are forwarded to Constantinople, to the Patriarchate, for canonical election in the final instance. And that's why I said at the beginning, it's a little bit murky, okay? So it's important to remember all those pieces, the charter, the bylaws, and the articles of agreement, which are all official documents, governing documents for our church. Another question which people have been asking is, when must he be elected? Well, chapter 5, paragraph 12 of our bylaw states that in the event of a vacancy in the office of the Metropolitan, names of candidates for that office shall be presented to the consistory board by the Council of Bishops for election at a general council to be convened not later than 1 year after such vacancy occurs. And so in the given instance, we must elect a new Metropolitan no later than July 9th, 2022. The next question, how is a Metropolitan or a bishop elected? In preparation for the Church Sobor in 2008, a policy and procedure document was prepared by the Episcopal Search and Development Committee, of which I was a member. And this document outlined the exact procedure for how bishops could be elected in the UOCC. It is my understanding that the guidelines of this document were followed in 2008 when Bishops Hladio and Andri were elected, but was not followed in 2010. And I was not present at either of those Sobors, and so I'm relying on eyewitness accounts of those who were for that information. I am not able to find this policy and procedure document on the website of the UOCC, and so I'm not sure of its status. I can only say that according to my memory, it was a well thought out and well-crafted document, and would respectfully suggest that it or something like it might be approved and circulated by the leadership of the UOCC to all our parishes well in advance of the Sobor in July, so as to help guide those who will be taking part in the election of our new Metropolitan. And so the conclusion, what can we agree on? I'm sure that no one would disagree with the thought that it is important to elect a man who is caring, hardworking, competent, a bridge builder, a person with vision, and an example of servant leadership. Likewise, remembering that whoever we elect holds the position till death, debility, or resignation, I'm sure we all agree upon the importance of taking as much time as necessary to find the best possible candidate for this position. If this person can be identified by July, very good. If not, we should not feel pressured to make a premature selection. Further, clarity in regard to the practical aspects of identifying and electing a metropolitan or bishop cannot but be helpful. If the current consistory is not able to draft or adapt and approve a policy and procedure document which outlines and presents a clear process for the election of bishops prior to this July, it should be a priority for the incoming consistory to do so. It will give needed clarity to a necessary and unavoidable aspect of church life, which at the present time seems very arcane and esoteric to the average member of the church. And finally, I think we can all agree that congruence between and among our governing documents would be helpful as well. A healthy balance must be struck between the hierarchical and the conciliar dimensions of church life. Church polity is a both-and reality. That is, the church requires lay as well as hierarchical leadership. bishops, priests, and lay people all need to feel that their needs and concerns are being met, that they are being respected, that their voices are being heard, etc. This will require both attitudinal and constitutional adjustments, and specifically in regard to the selection and election of bishops, the verbiage of the Charter, the bylaws, and the Articles of Agreement should ideally be harmonized. There is no doubt that the UOCC, like any ecclesiastical or human organization, will only go as far as her leaders take her. Most importantly, we must pray that God will send us a faithful, dedicated, hardworking, caring, committed, wise, and holy man who will be able to work cooperatively with the clergy and faithful for the spiritual and communal renewal and growth of the UOCC. In closing, I would like to thank Father Ihor for the opportunity of offering this presentation, and to say that if and where I am incorrect in my facts, or if it can be shown that any of my interpretations or conclusions cannot be supported by the facts and documents cited, I welcome correction. Thank you.
Упс. Дякую, отче Богдане. Дякую, отче Богдане, за вашу презентацію. Я також хотів, I just wanted to say also that as I'm thanking you for your presentation, you were talking about conciliarity, and a couple of days ago I stumbled across a document in Ukrainian, from Ukraine, that talks about state building for a future Ukraine. Probably something different from the church, but it's worth reading as well, you know, because what they're talking about is kind of talks about our church, the policy as church governance as well. So they said the following: the theological tenets and principles of orthodoxy, which may seem outdated to anyone for a long time, turn out to be, again, it's not my words, I'm just reading it as it published on Security of Ukraine, turn out to be modern and up to date, and Orthodox doctrines of council and council governance can serve as important benchmarks in understanding political and social discussions that not only about the church life, but also about, not only about the church life, but also about church life, how a just society in an independent democratic country should be built. The doctrines of councils and council governance in modern Ukraine society dominate much more. Anyways, they talk about this, but it's interesting, you know, that the principles of соборноправність чи соборність, наприклад, говориться дуже гарно, дуже цікаво в цьому документі. And they define it that such peculiarities of modern democracy as liberalism, libertarianism, and solidarity, which are declared in the platforms of many Ukrainian political parties, find a lively response in the mentality of Ukrainians, in particular because the idea of social unity has undergone a long evolution of a densely right-wing development. This is why a category of sobornists in Ukrainian state work and ideology should be understood more broadly than sobornists of Ukrainian land. Unity in the sense of mental, spiritual, cultural, and closeness, community of social, economic, political, and other interests of citizens of the country, regardless of their ethnic origin, religious and other worldviews and political views, which is manifested in their daily interaction. The development of the, okay, so anyways, it's a very interesting approach or adaptation of the idea of conciliarity in the political system of Ukraine right now, and more talked about. I дякую, отче, once again for your for your very interesting presentation. Probably opened up the eyes of many of us, and you know, nobody goes and says, okay, so today I'm going to read UOCC bylaws, just you know, like, because it's such a like a bestseller. But it is very important to familiarize ourselves with those bylaws and with the principle of governance, you know, before we start talking about election, importance of certain elements, or unimportance of that, you know. So I would invite people to actually ask questions if there is. I see that there is Helena that posts said that a strange process that it is not an election. A proper election would be a healthier process. Would you make a comment about this, Orchid, or you already had said about this quite a few things?
Well, honestly, when you look at the political process in the United States or Canada, to say that a proper election would be a healthier process. I don't know. I think that there are good checks and balances within the biblical tradition, within the canonical tradition, within the, if you want to say the constitution of the church, etc. And that idea of having those checks and balances, I think, is very, very important because, again, we're not talking about the loyal order of water buffaloes. You know, we're talking about a position, and we're talking about a reality that whose consequences when failure happens are eternal, or whose consequences when success happens are eternal. And Father, you know just as well as I do that we, just as priests, we hold, you know, the souls of our parishioners in our hands, and so we will give account for them besides giving account for us. And the bishop holds all of our souls in his hands, right? So, like, if we really do believe what the church teaches, I mean, if we really do believe that there is a God and a Holy Trinity and a heaven and a hell and all this kind of stuff, well, all this stuff is extremely important. And we can't treat it as if somebody's, you know, running for the local school board. So that's why it is important not just to read the charter, the bylaws, the articles of agreement, but to read Metropolitan John's Eulis. There's another book I have. I've got a lot of citations in that paper. So if you're interested, his book about the bishop in the first 3 centuries, which is called, let me just pull it out. Eucharist, Bishop, Church, the unity of the church in the divine Eucharist and the bishop during the first 3 centuries. Okay, these are all excellent books. Yeah, all excellent books. We have those books by Senator Usyk and Dr. Trotsky, which are excellent books, you know, about the history of the UOCC. Sadly, you know, the last good history we have is from Dr. Trotsky from '68. Dr. Yerenyuk did a little pamphlet kind of a book in 2008, but that really didn't go into any depth. But it's really important, you know, to know why things are the way they are. And you can only do that by reading the history, right? Mm-hmm. Talking maybe to older parishioners, right? So that's really important. So like I say, I'm really not one for, how do you say? I'm not one for popular democracy. And I am absolutely convinced that nothing in the church, nowhere, anywhere, on any level, should be decided on the basis of a popularity contest, okay? But we do have an obligation, rather, we have a responsibility towards the church. In the UOCC, the responsibility that the faithful have is much more and much more exalted than that which most other Orthodox people have. The only other place where you're going to get the faithful voting for their bishop is in the OCA, which follows, by the way, the Constitution from 1917 Moscow Council, okay? Maybe that Western European Russian diocese that used to be under Constantinople, maybe they're still doing it, I don't know, I can't say for sure. And you have little pockets here and there, you know, mainly I think in the New World we see, like, for example, the Romanian Episcopate under the OCA, they have this. Of course, our Ukrainian Orthodox brothers and sisters in the United States, in South America, in Western Europe, they of course have the same polity that we have, you know, the so-called Soborno-Pravna polity. Mm-hmm. But really, we A, shouldn't take it for granted, and B, should take it very seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. Bogdan, yes, quite often, you know, the popular elections that we have in a as you were saying, in school board and stuff like that, you know, they respond to very sometimes political movements or ideologies of the time. The process that is established by the church is actually more or less, you know, tested through the centuries and centuries, you know, and worked so far, kind of thing. And hopefully will be working forever. Otche Bogdane, there's quite a few comments actually. Oksana Bondarchuk said, in choosing the Metropolitan of the UOCC, must or should they be Canadian?
Historically, I mean, we had Metropolitan, later Patriarch Mstislav, that came over from Europe. We had, of course, Metropolitan Hladio. By the time Metropolitan Mikhail became Metropolitan, I don't know if he had taken Canadian citizenship. I think that as a general rule, you should say, well, of course, because, you know, if the person is married to the flock in Canada, he, of course, you know, should be a Canadian, but there's no canonical nor statutory, what do you call it, rule that says that he must be a Canadian, whether that would be born in Canada or naturalized. So I guess that's the, you know, that's the clearest answer I can give to that.
So Father Chad Publication had asked, Fathers, do you know if there is any planning happening for the election of our consistory board?
I'm not on the consistory. I don't know what's going on there. You know, contact consistory people to ask that question, or, you know, anything about the consistory, I don't know. So just talk to the consistory about that.
Very good question here from Hladio Beznachuk. Says, how do the parishioners play a role in the election?
Well, you know, we just went through this at our parish at the AGM a couple of weeks ago, well, 3 weeks ago now. First of all, the parish should elect delegates, and because the Sobor is going to be virtual this year, there should be no problem with getting the requisite amount of delegates. We are allowed 25 delegates, 1 delegate per 25 members or part thereof, right? So if you have 100 delegates, you're allowed 400 parishioners, you're allowed 4 delegates plus the priest. And so first of all, the parishioners should want to be a delegate. So that's the first part of the answer to that question. The second part of the answer to that question is that whoever the delegates are should become informed about how things work, what the situation is, what are the challenges, what are potential solutions, and just come to the Sobor ready to be a positive influence on the result of the Sobor.
I just wanted to mention to Halina that we had in 2008 when we were preparing for that extraordinary council in Saskatoon. You know, Keith Swinton had put together big binders, you know, with our bylaws, policies, and procedures, and so on and so forth. And that's what we used for all the delegates for that council, actually, you know, from our parish. But it's a very valid point what Father Bogdan is talking about, you know, is that whoever's our delegates are from our parishes, you know, have to be prepared and informed. It's not a party, you know, it's rather a heavy work, you know, prayer and work for the benefit of the church, because for the next 5 years we're electing consistory. For the next 5 years we're given consistory direction what to do. Okay, so Ivan Yurichuk has the following question. What will happen to the Sobor if the country is still in partial shutdown in July? I think you had answered that question.
Yeah, it's going to be, at least the last I heard, it's going to be a virtual Sobor so that people will be able to participate from wherever they are.
Yeah, yeah. So Yuri Sluzer thank us for important discussion. We truly do need to pray for the blessed outcome.
I mean, really, you know, honestly, the simple answer to how do you choose a metropolitan? You pray and you fast. If we were good Bible-believing Christians, that's what we would do. Okay.
Has this session been recorded, and can we obtain a copy? It is on the Facebook and YouTube of our church, and you can always access it at any point of time. Hala is asking the question, will the candidates be known well in advance of the Sobor?
Yeah, that's something I can't say. That's dependent upon the organizing committee of the Sobor, and then whoever is going to be choosing or proposing the candidates for the Metropolitan, post of Metropolitan. So again, that's something that, you know, Metropolitan Yuri, the bishops, or particular consistory members might be able to answer. I can't.
Mm-hmm. Just during the time when you were chancellor, right? There was a really active Episcopal search committee, right?
Yeah.
That have done a lot of good work, you know, and they recommended to the Metropolitan, I think it was to the Metropolitan Ivan, those new candidates, right? So
Mhm.
they were doing the job. Metropolitan blessed them to do that work. They would have been doing that job for the Metropolitan. That was my, if I can recollect that, if my recollection is correct. So is there a maximum limit of the number of delegates from each parish? I think, Father, you had
Yes, it is. Yeah, one delegate per 25 registered parishioners or part thereof. So if you have 101 parishioners, you are allowed 5 delegates. If you have 99 parishioners, you're allowed 4 delegates.
Okay. Any other questions? We have a really good audience here, but somehow people seem to be a little bit shy to ask questions. It was when we were on the consistory together many years ago. Actually, I can't believe it. It's almost 15 years ago.
My
10.
beard was still black.
Okay. At that point of time, there had been lots of discussions, about how is there a need to change bylaws? Is there a need to,
Mhm.
even Metropolitan Sotirius was saying, oh, you need to orthodoxize those bylaws and stuff like that. Would you like to kind of make some at least speculative comments about this, or we would leave it for the other time because it wasn't part of the conversation today?
Well, the speculative comments I already made in the presentation. There are discrepancies, even within the bylaws themselves, in regard to how the Metropolitan is chosen, right? And anytime you get those interstices, anytime there's not complete clarity, that always opens a door for somebody to say, oh, sprava formalna, or something like that, right? And so that's why I think that it's really important to deal with that, okay? That what is said and the way it is said in the charter should be harmonized with what is said and the way it's said in the bylaws, which should be harmonized with what is said and the way it's said in the articles of agreement all around, that those 3 documents should be harmonized. But we also have to understand that documents will not, they are important, okay? Because we live in a society where, there's the rule of law, okay? There are governance issues, right? And so you need to have properly formulated documents so that you can conduct your business in a way which will be congruent with both governmental and civil legislation, okay? So that's why those bylaws are important. But unless there is goodwill and common sense, nothing will ever work, whether it's in your family, whether it's at your workplace, in your parish, whatever. And so we really can't put more emphasis, how to put it, we can't put enough emphasis on just goodwill and common sense, because we have to remember, and again, this is not to cast aspersions anywhere at all, okay? Jesus Christ came to save sinners, of whom I am the chief, right? But we have to remember that we had more or less the same statute and bylaws in place in the 90s when Metropolitan Vasily was Metropolitan, when Father Krauchenko, Father Makarenko were the chairs of the Presidium. And things were driving along pretty nicely, right? I remember the 90s, right? And things were going pretty well. So what was the difference then to now? I would suggest that part of it was simply a lack of forward vision. And again, I'm not blaming anyone. We normally, when things are good, we aren't saying, okay, what's wrong? How do I fix it, right? But it's another good book, if you'd like to read it, called The Ukrainian Religious Experience, published by Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies out in Edmonton, their press. It was a symposium given in preparation for the celebration of the millennium of Christianity in the Rus Ukraine. I believe that it took place in 1985, and one of the papers given there was by a statistician named Oleg Volovina from the United States. I believe at that point he was in Chapel Hill or something, and he did a statistical analysis of the demographics of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada and the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Canada. Well, if you read his article there, what he wrote in 85 has come to pass, okay? So this is why it's really important to sort of, be on top of things. And again, I'm not blaming anybody. I remember, the mid-90s, things just seemed great. The Sobor in 2000, thing just seemed great. So, that's just something that we have to keep in the back of our mind. No matter how we might perfect, even if it's possible to perfect the statute and bylaws, unless people are going to manifest goodwill, common sense, unless they're going to work hard, unless they're going to, care for the good, support their parish, their diocese, their church, whatever, well, the statute won't do anything. So that's where I think that we have to be very, circumspect about the whole statute thing. Yeah, things could be better. But if everybody were working hard in their parish, going to church every Sunday, praying at home every day, if they were donating 10% of their income to the church, we'd be in a vastly different boat, So yeah, the statutory thing is important, but it is, if anything, a smaller problem than the problem of simply indifference to matters of the faith in general.
As many manuals you can write and put together, if there is no participation on our side, then there is no response on our side, Christian response on our side. They prove to be of no value, kind of thing. Дякую, Отче. That was very good, what you mentioned. If you can just, before we answer Oksana Bodnarchuk's questions, if you can just mention about those three documents you have said, if you can just explain those three documents you mentioned before, actually 4 documents you mentioned before: charter,
Okay.
bylaws, and their
Yeah.
histories, and article of agreement
Yeah.
in Constantinople, and
Yeah.
policy and procedure manual.
Yeah, these documents are all available on the website of the UOCC. Just go on under that first tab, and you'll go down to documents, and you'll find them all there. The charter was submitted and approved in the Parliament of Canada in 1929. It was then it was revised in 1990 when the name of the church was changed officially from the Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church of Canada to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Canada. And it is the updated version that is on the church website. So that's the first document. The second document is the bylaws. Now the bylaws there, the cover says it's the 2008 bylaws, but if you look at the actual hyperlink, it is the 2000, it says it's the 2015 updated. So these are the most updated bylaws of the UOCC. And they basically are sort of our, our governing document, how we conduct our business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For this, it has both civil and ecclesial aspects to it. You can read that. Some of it is easier and makes more sense. Some of it is more difficult. I hate reading the stuff about the church courts. It just makes me crazy. But anyway, it's all there, right? So nothing is, nothing is hidden. All the governing documents are there. The articles of agreement were the document that was approved. It was agreed to between representatives of the UOCC and the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople in 1989, and then the document was approved at the 1990 Sobor of the UOCC by the Sobor, and So this document also has official approbation. It's rather short, but there's a nice commentary, and in advance and afterwards, by Father Ihor Kutash. Father Ihor, if you're listening, I do my poklon before you. Anyway, there's a nice, it's very short, and it just gives the list of, this is what we agree to from our side, from your side, and this is how we're going to work together in the future, okay? So that's our agreement with Constantinople, okay? The other thing that is there is the policy and procedure manual, and that refers to the, if you want to say, the day-to-day practicalities of life in the consistory office and among the consistory board, as well as within the UOCC as a whole, and how various things, like a question, am I allowed to be a member of 2 parishes? Well, go see the policies and procedures and you'll get your answer, okay? So those documents are all there. Another document which is really interesting historically is the so-called Archpastoral Epistles. It's there as well, and it is a list. I don't know what happened since 2008, but up until August of 2008, all of the decisions of the Council of Bishops, what in most churches would be called a Synod of Bishops, right? When they gather together, what in our church is called the Council of Bishops, all their decisions that they made at their meetings were gathered together in that booklet. And so you see really interesting things, especially like from the 50s with Metropolitan Hladio, Metropolitan Andrei later on in the 70s into the 80s, Metropolitan Vasily, into the 90s, etc. Very, very interesting reading there. So that would be another document that, again, it's not a governing document in a legal sense, but it is very interesting to sort of give a trajectory of where the church has been in the past.
Отже, Ганя Метулинська posted the link to the documents that you had mentioned, so it's right here. And also,
Good.
I just wanted to add to your commentaries. We had, you had mentioned about couple sources for history of our church. I think that Yuri Mule-Klucek had put together almost like a collection of documents, if you were to say it, in 4 volumes. And I'm hoping that the next 2 volumes that are only on soft copies available will be available at least on our website or our church at some point of time, because he put lots of time into that. And I was one of those guys who was helping him to edit those documents.
Good, yeah, but they're only in Ukrainian, correct?
They're only in Ukrainian, yes.
Yeah, that's the. Do you remember offhand what was the last year that he dealt with? Where did
Actually, it was in 80s already. In volumes 5 and 6, it was already in 80s, early 80s. And it was, like I said, I remember editing this because as a student, I just came to Canada as a student, so we kind of just needed to make a little bit of few dollars, and we were just sitting there and working on those books. Unfortunately, it had not been published, but I know it's on soft copy at the consistory, and I'm hoping it's going to be published at least online. I also wanted to mention that the second book, it's Father Minenko's book, and it was Establishment of Metropolia, from historical books, And we also have a number of memoirs, I think memoirs of Father Sluzar, memoirs of
Father Samets, yes.
Father Samets, my father the priest, Vasilia Samtsa. So those are available too, and they provide a really good insight into the history of our church. And Oksana is asking a question. I agree that politics should not play a role. Has there ever been more than one candidate proposed? What is the process that vets the candidates?
Yeah. The UOCC, like many smaller Orthodox churches in the diaspora, does not have, monastics coming out, bursting out at the seams, right? So in order for a man to be a bishop, he has to be monastic, has to be unmarried. And that just ain't a, commodity that you find walking on the street every day, right? So that's one of the problems. Now that Ukraine is opened up, etc., that does open up a possibility there, but there's a big issue of cultural affinity, right? Like they say in Ukrainian, треба мати спільну мову, right? And можна розмовляти на англійському, не маючи спільної мови, right? Okay? So, and, дехто з нас розмовляє по-українському, але не за, So, that is a really important thing. And it comes back, that's why I thought that quote from Metropolitan Zizioulis was so important, that the priest or the bishop or the metropolitan is really in an existential ontological relationship with the community that he serves. And that can happen. I know that that can happen, even where that, common language, the spilna mova, might be fractured. Okay? All of us, we know as priests. Some of us are pretty bilingual, but always, for me, I will never be as fluent in Ukrainian as I am in English. I grew up here, right? And Father Ihor, probably the other way around, maybe. You never know, right?
Absolutely.
But we to try. And so when you have that type of relationship, okay, you absolutely have to try to find someone, okay? When I leave the parish, I want to make sure that we have somebody there after me. God forbid he should be Father Botan, but that he should be dedicated, that he should love the people, that he's going to care for the people, right? And so the question is, has there ever been more than one candidate? And what is the process to candidates? As to the first part of that question, due to the fact that we really don't have many candidates at all, the only time I am aware that there has been more than one candidate proposed was in 1951, when Metropolitan Mikhail Horoshi was proposed, then Metropolitan Ilarion came in sort of at the last minute. You can read about that in either one of these books. And so Metropolitan Mikhail, stepped back, and Metropolitan Ilarion became the Metropolitan, okay? But the process that vets the candidates, according to our statute and bylaws, is the Metropolitan and or Council of Bishops, if there is one, and the consistory, okay? So that is where it begins.
Yeah, I think we kind of trying to keep it to 1 hour limit.
Yes.
I already have been over an hour. Maybe if there's any other questions, please pose them right now. Otherwise, we will be concluding our conversation. And again, this is a topic that we can talk about for much longer time, because it's very interesting, it's very timely, and lots of people who are even watching tonight, are caring. Those who are caring for the future of our church. Otec Bogdan had said a very, very good, very, how would you say, very як дзеркало дивився, because it is true that talking about using one language but not understanding one another, it's quite problematic, actually. It could be quite problematic in the church, when people from two different cultures meet and start talking. There's lots of biases and lots of beliefs, lots of things, lots of cultural baggage that comes into conversation. To find a common language probably is through humility, right? Which is through the aspect of humility, try to converse, understand one another, and then after that, make some kind of decision and move forward. Without the conversation, nothing will move forward, and no action can take place. So, це моя така думка, but I might be wrong,
You never go wrong with humility, Father.
That's right.
My
I
wife
have a.
my wife says that to me all the time.
My wife doesn't have to say it; she just looks at me, you know, and I understand that I'm wrong. Vladika, so I have this question here. Somebody texted me who can't post on the YouTube. He said, "What about Bishop Andrei and Bishop Ilarion as candidates?" I,
What about
we
them? They can be
That's
candidates.
right.
I mean, but that's not for me to say. That's for, the Metropolitan and then the consistory and all of that.
Yeah, yeah. For those who watched the entire conversation today, you realize that Father Bogdan had mentioned it a number of times. There is a certain due process, and we have to follow that process. And that process had worked for hundreds of years, so hopefully it'll work. It'll work this time as well. Well, not hopefully. We'll pray that this time it will work as well. So. Отже, я думаю, ми будемо закінчувати, тому що я не бачу
Добре.
будь-яких запитань. Я ще раз перевірю електронну пошту. Немає.
Нічого, я дуже насичений день мав і хочеться спати.
Так. Звичайно, отже, я знаю, що таке переїжджати, так що, отже, okay, so last two questions, Platon and Helena. Should they not be first considered?
That's not my decision, thank God. So to ask the Metropolitan that, number one. And I see Helena's thing about, is being monastic or unmarried still relevant and necessary in 21st century? Of course it is. Of course it is. But if you're talking about, should a bishop be a monastic? Well, according to the canons and according to our bylaws, he must be. So that's, maybe you don't think that's a satisfactory answer, but that's the only answer I can give.
But please reiterate, why did we start having?
Well, until the 6th century, for sure, bishops could be married, often were married, okay? And there were issues. I would recommend to you the book by John Meyendorff, Holy Tradition or Tradition in the Church or whatever. I'll find it out. I'll send it to Father Ihor. There's an article there where he talks about the canons in the contemporary church and the relevance of the canons, to the contemporary scene, which he wrote this in the 60s, right? And he talks about the canon saying that a bishop must be monastic. And he makes a very interesting comment. He said, we must remember that even if we were to go back to the practice of having married bishops, that does not necessarily mean we would automatically have better bishops. Because, the bishop isn't made by this or the lack thereof, right? So the reason it happened was very much for practical reasons, okay? Issues of the job load. And personally, I would tell you, those 3 years in Winnipeg that I had, there was a lot of traveling involved. I don't see how a man, and I wasn't the bishop, but there was a lot of traveling involved. I don't see how a man could effectively do that job and be an effective father and husband. Okay, so that's one reason. Another reason is that there were issues with church property, that, the bishop historically was in charge of all the church property. And so, church property would end up in the bishop's, estate. Okay? And you had things like this going on, and what belonged to the bishop. If you go read the canons, you'll see there's lots of canons about making sure that the diocese has what they call an oikonomos, somebody who looks after all the finances and everything else, right? So that they are sequestered from the bishop, and that all property is clearly designated. This belongs to the bishop privately, this belongs to the diocese, right, to the church. But because of that, the decision was taken that for the good of the church, we're just going to have monastics, because monastics don't own anything. Now, of course, we have a problem with that, because Nowadays, we don't have a monastery here. Some churches, the bishop or the metropolitan does live in a monastery, and he's, has that monastic kind of a life surrounding. Whereas here, we don't have that. I remember my old spiritual father, Father Roman, used to sort of complain, saying, because he was the chaplain at a Romanian Orthodox women's monastery, down in Michigan, and he would say, "This isn't good. I live here in America now. I have to have a checking account. Monks shouldn't have a checking account." Okay, so you get those problems too. That's like, no matter how you look at it, there's not going to be a perfect solution. We would pray, though, that whoever it would be a man who's holy, dedicated, caring, a good father. Okay, all those things.
It's interesting, I'm trying to finish the conversation, but in one of my theology classes, we had a really interesting conversation about, about the calling of bishops, and Father Maxim, I believe, quoted fathers of the church, and he had said that for episcopal role, there has to be men that came out of the community, either a widower came from community of the family, or came from the community of the monastery, where he was formed from the very early age in the sense of obedience, in sense of communicating with people, sense of living with others, and then only he went up all the way up to the ranks to become a bishop. Or somebody who is a widower, who community of the family had shaped and formed him, and then he becomes a bishop. He stood for effectively understanding people under his care, kind of thing, his new church of spiritual family. So добре, дякуємо всім ще раз. Отже, якщо можна, я тоді прочитаю молитву, а ви дасте благословення. Добре? Богородиця Діво, радуйся, благодатна Марія, Господь з тобою, благословена ти між жонами, благословений плід утроби твоєї, бо ти породила Христа Спаса душ наших. Слава Отцю і Сину Святому Духу, нині повсякчас, на віки вічні. Амінь. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй. Отче, благослови.
З нами Бог, Його благодать і чоловіколюбство завжди, нині повсякчас і на віки віків.
Амінь.
Амінь. Дякуємо.
Дякую, Отче. Дякую всім, що дивилися. Спаси Господи. До побачення.
На добраніч.
І ми також в п'ятницю будемо мати розмову з Іваном Голюком якраз про процес відкриття церкви, тому що дуже також багато питань є і в нашій парафії, і з інших парафій, тому хто бажає чи має нагоду, будь ласка, дивіться. Також буде нагода запитатися питання. Дякую вам, Отче.